I hear from leaders all the time, well, I kind of
Mhm.
want to be liked. All
Yeah.
right. I always say you don't have to be liked. Should be friendly. You should be trusted and respected for sure.
Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Lab. I'm Henry Kirk,
And I'm Jonathan Aronson.
and today we're going to talk about a very important topic, which is kind of like self-reflection as a manager. And I'll preface this by saying I was talking with a former colleague of mine recently, and they were telling me how they have been in management for about a year or so now, and they were considering leaving their role because they felt like they weren't getting anywhere, that they were being held back by those around them. And I started, probing, asking some clarifying questions. And what I kind of learned from this situation was that I thought their approach was off because I was hearing things like, well, I will make a proposal on, this new process, and everyone will be in alignment and agree. And then when I actually go to implement it, I get pushback from, senior leadership and things like that. And so I'd suggested that they take a look at a certain resource that was very helpful to me because I've been in the same thing with the 1 Minute Manager, and they responded back after reading the book that it was very helpful, and they kind of realized that were their approach needed to be tweaked, and a whole bunch of other things. So I thought this would be a great topic for Jonathan and I to discuss, which is like, he didn't realize that he was being a little too dominant, too aggressive, and not delegating enough to those around him to empower them. And so I had to point it out to him, and so it would be great. Like, how do you identify that? How do you self-reflect? What are some steps that you can take? Things like that, right? That's right, Jonathan. That's pretty much what we want to talk about. Okay,
Pretty much.
pretty much. All right, cool. Why don't you continue on?
um, well, I mean, the biggest part of leadership is you really want to make sure that you have a good line of communication open with the people you're leading. I mean, you mentioned that this person could be intimidating at times, and there's always some kind of power dynamic going on to begin with, right?
Mhm.
It's a boss, it's a manager, somebody reports to somebody. And, especially in engineering, or, I mentioned before, engineers, mathematicians, scientists, they're not, they generally are do IC jobs, They're not really out there verbalizing a
Mm.
lot. Yeah, around what they want to do, maybe, but then you have the power dynamic of a boss. And honestly, people do get intimidated. I mean, there's an ego thing, and it goes back to the fight and flight, right? And if you have somebody who is stature is big too, can be intimidating, how their personality is. So the idea of leadership is really make sure you have that good connection with the people. Remember, we talked about trust, and part of that trust is, the able, believable, connected, and dependable. Well, the connection's really important. Um, and the interesting thing about what you're talking about, Henry, is this leader thought he was connected to his team when in fact he was not.
Yes. Yeah. And
Right?
I've been in this situation before where people just yes you and they say great idea, but
Yeah.
don't they're afraid to speak up. And this still happens to me to today. Like I think
Yeah.
in this person's example where I quickly identified the problem is he's exceptional technically. And so I know that when he was describing some changes to their technical architecture in
Mhm.
detail and the pros and cons, he already knew what he wanted to do, and he wasn't he thought he was involving his team per se, but that's intimidating when you're somebody that's maybe less junior on your team and whatnot when you have it all. And so I suggest I see this all the time with engineering stuff. So
Yeah.
I always suggest to those that are exceptional is ask the questions to get others to come up with the idea that you're trying to impart. Like if there's pros and cons for a new system design, try to enable them to dive in to be able to come up with those pros and cons as opposed to just spewing them out yourself, because they'll learn something along the way and then you won't come across as so
Right.
technically intimidating. But then you can like oversee that and try to guide them where they need to go, you know? So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always, so many times I have to tell my clients basically, you're working too hard. And I find a lot of leaders work too hard because they feel it's either a control issue, um, or they feel it's their responsibility, so they have to come up with it, or it's a time issue. They don't want to spend the time for
Mm.
people to develop, to think for themselves. But if you develop a good, solid team and develop their ability to think for themselves and include them in the process, you get time back in the end because you won't be working so hard.
That's true.
Um, I find it interesting, and this is probably a significant thing about this person you're talking about, is that they had no awareness of their responsibility and how they were showing up and how they would, um, how they would affect how the team is working. Would you tell me he's killing it? Okay, or
Yeah,
he felt
he's
he was
crushing it,
killing it,
but he's so
crushing
soft
it.
spoken too, which is very interesting. He's a
Yeah,
very kind, like kind demeanor, but his
yeah,
intimidation comes from his intellect.
yeah.
So he doesn't use strong words. He doesn't get overly
Okay,
excited at things. It's very interesting. It's the opposite of me, where my intimidation is no, really my use of words, my tone. Like I am not as
you're
technically
in the face,
competent.
Henry.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, totally. Like I'm very intense when it comes to that.
Yeah,
And so like I have, I identified that one area that he had, because I've been there. But what I think is interesting is that he's respectful, quiet, soft
yeah.
spoken, but it
So that
comes out in
tells you
different
that
ways,
too.
Yeah,
Yeah. So that
yeah,
tells you it can come out in different ways, right?
yeah.
But always, if you're in a leadership position, question yourself before you question others. Actually, in any relationship, really, you should start with yourself. How are you showing up? How are you contributing to
Mm,
what's going on? It's a book called Difficult Conversations. It's been around for years. And that's part of it. How are we each contributing to the situation? Let's look at it. Let's not look at the person. Let's look at the problem that we're resolving here or trying to resolve for. Um, but it doesn't take a lot to fix it. See, that was the one thing that struck me when you told me the story. You basically said to him, "Look at yourself." Is that right?
yeah.
Take a
I
look at
said I
yourself
think
first.
I think it's your approach, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
don't take my word for it. I said, let me give you a resource, very quick read,
Right.
and I said, just read it and then come back to me and tell me if you resonate with what's being said there.
Yeah.
And he did
A-
after a couple days.
And that's the book I suggested to you back
Yeah, all
when
the
we first
time.
started.
The
When we
one, yeah,
first started, the 1 Minute Manager,
that's right. Yeah.
by Ken Blanchard. So it's how long does it take to read that book?
Well, that's what's funny is like I thought it was a joke at first because I was like, it's like feel like it's 20 pages long. It's probably like 50 or 60, but it's such a short read. I was like, how could you get anything out of it? But sometimes the most obvious things are just you need to be like, oh, I get it.
Yeah,
Yeah. So it took me
and
like
and then
a day to read it.
a day, couple hours, right? If
Yeah.
you actually sat down, just read it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and that's the thing for you folks out there that are in leadership or thinking about going into leadership. It can feel intimidating at first because it's a different job skill that you're doing. You got people involved. I really want to encourage people out there, whether it's a 1 Minute Manager model or somebody else leadership model basics, learn the basics. Okay. It's really not that complicated. In this book, particularly, they start with goal setting. What is the goal? What are we really trying to achieve here? Right.
Hmm.
And then they go into how do you motivate people, which is pretty simple. You know, recognize them for the job they're doing. That's motivation. Some autonomy helps too.
Hmm.
People like it
Yeah.
to be autonomous. But then how do you get feedback? When giving feedback, a lot of people don't like giving feedback, And it's like, but feedback's a gift. People learn from feedback. So the reason I think, from my experience, that people don't like feedback because they don't want to give bad news to somebody. I hear from leaders all the time. Well, I kind of
Mm.
want to be liked. All
Yeah.
right. I always say you don't have to be liked. Should be friendly. You should be trusted and respected for sure, right? So giving feedback, I would say, don't focus on the person. The person isn't intentionally going out of their way to screw up or be bad, as I say it, right? So focus on the problem, right? Again, you need connection, you need that trust and respect, so they're open to the feedback. But then just say, "Hey, here's what I noticed. Here's the impact of what I noticed. How do we move forward to get what the expectation is?"
Mm.
I mean, when you say it that way, it doesn't sound intimidating, does it?
No, not at all. No.
Not at all. But
Yeah.
how many people are like, "Ooh, I got to go talk to this person because they screwed up and did a bad job."
Yeah.
So, see, even when you think that way, you're focusing on the person, not the
Yeah.
problem. They screwed up. I have to go talk to them. I mean, it just conjures this big, scary thing,
Yeah.
that. So, for the engineers out there and the mathematicians and scientists, actually, if you just stick to the data, you'll be fine,
Well,
you
then there's
know?
also the delivery, of course. I mean, I think we can talk for hours about, feedback delivery because, yeah, I knew engineers that I worked with that were very direct people as a result, and they would
Yes.
give the feedback so direct that they would forget the emotions involved, and then the
Right.
report would,
Well,
not know how to take it well, and then would feel and then they didn't know how to bring them back because they'd be like, oh well,
yeah.
you're this or that, and so there's a whole part of that. Actually, I have a really good question for you. So doing a lot less work as a manager is great, and the typical engineering manager doesn't have to have too much involvement in technical aspects. They're responsible for delivering on technical products and
Yeah.
solutions. However, they usually have a team to execute and they kind of
Yeah.
guide it. At Google and other companies, they have a role called a tech lead manager, which, since the whole
Hmm.
layoff wave has come, when as they've consolidated teams, you find more of these because they're ICs and managers. So one of the things that I've always I've struggled with, and that I've see others struggling with, is balancing that IC to manager because you are expected in that role to have individual contributions that are technical, but
Yeah.
also manage a team. So any
Yeah.
tips for somebody that wants to develop their team, their people, plus also be meeting those technical responsibilities?
Like everything else, it's a balance, and it's not an easy balance. They throw people sometimes into these roles where they haven't had much leadership training, you know, and they're tech leads. So most of the tech leads, from my experience, is really they're not really managing or leading the team. They don't have HR responsibilities, for instance, but they are a what I call a tactical leader, meaning they're there really to make sure that the project is moving forward, not necessarily developing the team member. Now, that may come through it because they're going to learn something new, maybe, and part of your job is to teach them. But it's a much more directive role than it is a coaching role. Now, the manager of the team, not necessarily the tech lead, they're the ones that really have the responsibility for the motivation, for for the career development of the employee. Now, when the manager and the tech lead work well together, it's a good combination. It can work really well,
Yep.
but what happens is that a lot of times the manager, whose responsibility really is, never define how they're going to work together. How are we going to work together? What are our roles and responsibilities when it comes? What are yours as the tech lead? What situations do you lead on me? What situations do I expect you to resolve being the lead? So have that conversation, right? Have that conversation, set that up. It's just like, I'm going to go back to the 1 minute manager. It's about, what is the goal here? How are we going to approach this? Because remember, tasks make up the goal. So if the goal is to have this project or whatever it is to completion, okay, then what's the tasks involved? And there's leadership tasks, right, which is coming from the manager. And then there's technical tasks, which should be coming from the tech lead.
Mm.
And identifying what those roles and responsibilities are up front, what the goal is, how we're going to work together, save you a lot of grief on the back end.
So would this advice apply if that person is the same, if they have both roles? So that's been
Yeah,
happening
because
a lot lately, is where, and as the teams are flattening, they're consolidating these roles. So when I led my team, I was the engineer manager, and then I had several like tech lead managers underneath me,
okay,
and they served the dual role. And so during the layoffs, like you'll see a lot of these tech lead managers where they'll survive layoffs because they have, they produce, but at the
yeah,
same time, they're competing with their teams at times, depending on how much responsibility they have. So the problem that I used to have, and the way I would get around it, was giving more opportunity to technically guide the team to my broader team that didn't have the title of technical lead. What I mean by that is, if you're the technical lead and the manager of the team, you're supposed to be responsible for all the shots. So you'd call all the shots. And usually those that are on the team don't always have that opportunity to flex that technical muscle. And thus, when they want that responsibility, they leave. And so I understood that. And so to give everyone opportunities to kind of like build that
okay,
skill, I would give that out even though they didn't have the title. And I would say, all right, well, you're responsible for these technical things. And we'll, that's the expectation that I have. So that's how I ran my team. But like if somebody is a dual role like that and they're conflicted, like what would you recommend they do? Same advice that applies if they're separate, is just set the right division of labor, so to speak.
I think it's situational. I don't know whether you can say one size fits all.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's understanding who's on your team, what are their level of expertise, what are their aspirations. Um, and these are important conversations that managers should be having with their team members and get to know who they are and what they want. But like I said, from my understanding, what you're telling me, there's two different roles. A tech lead is a different lead than a manager
But they're
role.
merged. There is a combo role
There
that's
is a
always been
combo role
around.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's been
see
around, but it's
that's a
more prevalent. Yeah.
that's a hard thing to manage. But again, understand they're two different job skills. Okay, so you have two different hats, um, and you're gonna have to be aware of which hat you're wearing at any one time. You're not really wearing. If you're going to talk to some team members technically, make sure you're just another engineer. You're working things out. There is that power struggle we talked about, though. So you need to be aware of that and really invite people to say, don't think of me as your manager right now. Think of me as a team member, you know, tech equal. And we're trying to work through this problem and get a solution,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah. So like one of the challenges that I see when you're in the dual role and you're usually on the technical ladder is that you have to produce, let's say, very technical architecture, designs and execution on that. So if that's your responsibility and you have someone on your team that is rising up, how do you give them that opportunity to then participate in that if that's one of your expectations? Is it just that, like you said, you're wearing different hats and it's just unfortunate that on your team they may not have that opportunity? Because like, also with the, layoffs in big tech, at least I've seen
Yeah.
projects are getting consolidated. There's less opportunity to spin up projects that
Yeah.
normally you could do to get like, all right, well, I'll take this, you take that. There's a lot of interesting dynamics that have happened in the last several months that
Yep.
I think is uh, potentially creating challenges like I've had in the past.
Yeah, which goes back to why I said it's situational.
Okay.
You know, I don't think it's all one size fits all. And honestly, part of the challenge is again, here's how it was, here's how it is now, which has changed. Are you capable? Are you able? And are you willing to adapt to those changes? Um, you know, is it better to have a job than no job, or is it better not to have the job if you don't have the opportunities you're looking for? See, that's situational. It's individual.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but the point is really on what we're talking about here is as a manager, understand if you're combining it with tech, understand which hat you have on. Um, don't rule, don't lead in a tech position by power. Okay, focus on what you're looking to solve for, not on
Hmm.
you making all the decisions. Understand when you are managing and you are encouraging and setting goals and supporting your team, it's a different hat you have on or different job skills. So be aware of that. And again, what we said earlier was learn some basic leadership techniques. Leadership is just not, oh, well, I've been on this team for so long and now I'm going to lead them. All right. Like learn it, go read a 1 Minute Manager or go, pick up a radical candor book or conversational capacity, and learn some of these things. It won't take you that long, but that knowledge will go a long way or reduce your stress levels, and it really will have a positive impact on both you and the team.
Hmm.
So take person look at you. I think the biggest thing of what you talked about, though, honestly, Henry, look at yourself before you look at everybody else. How are you
Yeah.
showing up? How are
Yeah.
you contributing?
Yeah. Yeah. How do you do that if you're not used to doing that? Like what's a couple techniques that you can use to kind of reflect on these things? Like, would you
Well,
recommend someone find a another person to kind of like my former colleague was talking to me about something else and this came up and I was like, "Oh, tell me more." Should you find someone to chat with to repeat back kind of
yeah.
what they're hearing?
Well, couple things. I'm a big believer in coaching and mentorship, right?
Mhm.
So find somebody that can help you learn and grow in that position. Um, Listen to cool podcasts like this one,
That's true.
to
Yeah.
get ideas, right? But go out of your way to learn it. That's the important thing. Okay. And go out of your way to get some feedback on how you're doing. And, put your ego aside, you know, uh, change that ego into learning. What can I learn here? How can I do this better? And really, when you're in leadership, you're in service to the people you lead. Don't be the big boss,
Mm.
be the caring, developing boss. They all understand the power dynamic. You don't have to explain that to them.
Do you
All
think
right.
you can use your spouse as well? A few years ago, after someone had told me I was like intimidating, or there was something like that, a behavior I was exhibiting around that, like that my tone or something. And I remember coming home and asked my wife, I said, "Am I intimidating?" She's like, "Absolutely." I'm like, "Why didn't you tell me?" She's like, "I guess you never asked," or something like that. Like, do you think that your spouse is a good, or
I
significant
think it
other is
depends
like
on
a
who
good,
your spouse. I think it
oh,
depends
okay.
on who your spouse is. Like my spouse works um, in a corporation, right? In a
Mm.
big, pretty big company. So she can give me feedback, or she comes to me and asks about this situation or that situation. So I think if you have somebody and if you want to kind of know your personality, but don't forget there's a lot of bias involved when it comes to your spouse.
Mm.
um like that might be what attracts her to somebody like you, is she likes those strong, in your face personality, confident men. On the other hand, it could work differently in the workplace. So, are you intimidating? She could say, well, you could be. You have a strong you have a strong personality. You're not backwards about being forwards, as the English say, Um, on the other hand, she could say, but you also care about people and you want to do a
Hmm.
good job and you're not just some huge egotist. Yeah, you're a learner. You can
Oh, sure.
recognize,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
is a spouse somebody that you could bounce things off of? Sure, she's your partner, he's your partner. They're your partner, whatever. But again, coaching, um, finding a mentor, finding a trusted
Hmm.
advisor, somebody you respect and's got experience, that'll quicken the whole pace up too.
Hmm.
You know?
Do you, okay. Um, so getting back to kind of the whole preface of like being more self-aware, we've talked about some skills to kind of just like internalize and think it's yourself. Is there any other like regular practices that you think a manager or leader should go through to kind of like continue to develop and check themselves? Like for example, a lot of times I'll reflect after I say something. So is there some other better process of like just to like I've read journaling helps. I don't know. Is there what other things that someone could do to try to self-reflect before they, and head it off before they make a mistake, so to speak.
Well, I think, listen, with any new manager, especially, or somebody who's hasn't been in leadership long, be intentional about learning leadership. Okay, so part of that is understanding how you're doing. What are you doing? How so the journal. I love the journal part. Are you blocking out time to self develop your leadership? Are
Hmm.
you making that a priority? Again, it's about being intentional.
Hmm.
And we've
Okay.
talked about that before, right? Put your attention on your intention, you know.
Like
Um,
it.
a, and leadership is a learned skill. I want to let everybody know that. Everybody thinks, oh, some people are naturally born leaders. Very few, very few.
Hmm. So there's hope for everyone out there like myself.
There's hope for, well, look at how you've changed by working with such a wonderful coach.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, I guess we're almost out of time today, so we should
Okay.
start wrapping it up. So, why don't you, you know, help us start wrapping it up?
Okay. So, Henry, what were your
Yeah.
takeaways from today? And what are the actions you're now going to take moving forward based on today's conversation?
So takeaway is that need to before you start blaming others or moving into like what did they do or some like have a conversation with yourself. Well, what did I do to kind of contribute to that situation? And then also, obviously continue learning. Like I even though I've been, in management and leadership roles for like 15 years now, I still like learn things every week with this podcast and on my own. It's just you have to continue to want to learn. So definitely the big takeaway is that never stop learning.
Yep.
Yeah,
And there's some great resources out there that are, on the internet. You guys can check out Blanchard.com. Resources is one. Also, I think it's the Center for Creative Leadership, ccl.org is another one. So just take a look around, a lot of information out there. You'll see a lot of it similar. That's when that's the stuff that works. It's just said in a different
hmm,
way or slightly different model. So go out there and learn. I'm all for that.
that's great. Awesome. Any other takeaways that you might have?
No, just, if you get setbacks as a leader, just learn from that and go forward. You'll be fine. You'll figure it out. There's hope
That's
for
true.
everyone.
Yep, tomorrow's always
Okay.
another day. Yeah.
Tomorrow's
That's
always
right.
another day.
That's great. All right, awesome. Well, this has been a great episode. I'm Henry Kirk,
I'm Jonathan Aronson.
and you have been listening to the Leadership Lab. And again, before we go, please hit that like button, subscribe button, bell button to continue to get encourage us to do these episodes every week and get notified every Friday when we launch new ones. So thanks so much for listening and have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.